The last sound from my father wasn't his voice, it was gunfire. 3 sharp cracks through the speaker, then silence. He was the sheriff, a man who served the badge for 30 years. But that night, his own deputies turned their guns on him, and all I heard was his breath fading as he whispered, "Don't trust the ones behind the badge." Hit like, subscribe for more betrayal stories, and comment your city or country. The night his call came through, the base was quiet. Training had ended, and I was alone in my quarters, cleaning my uniform. One of those nights soldiers used to make silence mean something. My father rarely called after midnight. When he did, it was never small talk. The phone buzzed again. His name flashed across the screen, Sheriff Colin Ward. I answered, expecting his dry humor or some fatherly lecture about honor. But all I heard was his breathing. Fast. Frantic. Something in his tone forced me upright. "Dad? Talk to me, what's happening?" Then came shouting. Muffled voices. The slam of a car door. Someone yelled, "Put it down, sir." Gunfire cracked like thunder. Glass shattered. He gasped my name. Then nothing. That silence, it stretched long enough to carve itself into my memory. Even after 19 years in command, nothing prepared me for that kind of quiet. They said it was an accident. That's what the department told me when I flew back home the next evening in full uniform. They handed me my father's badge, still smudged with dried blood, and said he got caught in a crossfire chasing a robbery suspect. But I knew the tone behind their words. I've seen enough soldiers lie to know what guilt does to a man's voice. My father always told me, in this town, the badge shines brightest when it's hiding the darkest things. He was right. The funeral was a spectacle. Cameras, flags, politicians shaking hands and pretending they cared about a man most of them despised for being honest. The department lined up in perfect rows, black suits, black sunglasses, plastic sympathy. As I looked across their faces, I spotted something. They weren't grieving. Some were smiling. Low, subtle smirks traded like secrets. That's when I noticed her. A woman in uniform, distant from the rest, head down. Her nameplate read Morgan Hale. When the ceremony ended, she walked up to me quietly and said under her breath, "Commander Ward, it wasn't a robbery. It was an order." Before I could ask who sent it, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. That night, I went back to my father's old house. The place was too quiet, too organized, as if someone had already cleared what they didn't want me to find. His study smelled like cigarettes and gun oil, the same blend I grew up with. On his desk, I found a locked drawer. Using his old knife, I pried it open. Inside were case files, dozens of them, all labeled internal. One folder had a name that caught my attention, Deputy Preston Lane. Attached was a photo of my father and Preston at a diner. In the corner of the image, a reflection in the window, someone aiming a camera from a distance. Written across the top in my father's handwriting. "If something happens to me, start with him." My chest ached. That single line changed the way I breathed. It didn't take long for the small-town whispers to start. People avoided my eyes at gas stations. Old friends crossed the street before I could greet them. One night at a bar, I overheard a deputy mutter, "Should have stayed in the army, Commander. You don't belong here anymore." That's when I knew this wasn't grief, it was warning. Later, when I left the bar, I noticed a parked car across the road. Engine off. Headlights dim. The silhouette of a man watching. He didn't move when I stepped toward him, just rolled down the window and said, "You asked too many questions, hero. Let the dead stay quiet." He drove off before I could catch a license plate. I stood there under the flickering street light, realizing this wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about survival. Back at home, I spread the files across the table and started connecting names. Deputies from different counties, same bank deposits, same judge signatures clearing suspicious raids. My father had uncovered something far bigger than a local cover-up. At the bottom of the last folder, I found a small digital recorder. I pressed play. Static, then my father's voice. "If you hear this, son, they're in the department. Some of them were mine. I wanted to save them from what they became. But greed turned them into killers. If I don't make it, don't fight them with bullets. Fight them with truth. I stopped the recording mid-sentence. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from restraint. A soldier learns patience, but a son learns grief differently. I called Morgan the next morning. No answer. Her number rang twice, then a robotic voice. This number has been disconnected. Something inside me shifted. That's when I decided I wouldn't let this become another buried story. I'd find every man involved in my father's death, and the world would know exactly what they'd done. Over the next few days, I stayed off the radar. Changed cars. Avoided hotels. Operated the way I once did behind enemy lines. Always moving. Always listening. Every trail led to one man, Deputy Preston Lane. He'd been promoted suddenly after my father's death. Same man my father had marked. The same man now guarding the department's evidence lockup. I drove out to his house at dusk. It was empty, but his dog barked at the door like it knew me. Inside his mailbox were two items, a court summons and a torn photograph of my father and a young Preston, smiling, friendly, trusting. On the back, we were brothers once. That night, I sat in my truck outside my father's old station, staring at the building that used to stand for justice. Through the glass windows, I could see the plaques, awards, and officers laughing at the front desk. The same men who lowered his casket 2 days ago. I gripped his badge in my hand. It felt heavier than any gun I'd ever held. Lightning flashed, cutting through the night. And for the first time since his death, I whispered to the empty air, "You didn't just lose your father. You lost the man who taught this town what truth looked like." My father's words played again in my head. Don't fight them with bullets. Fight them with truth. So that's what I plan to do. But truth in a place this dirty can kill louder than any weapon. Morning came gray and heavy, the kind of silence that felt staged, like the whole town was pretending to breathe together. The rain hadn't stopped since the funeral, and puddles formed around the sheriff's office as I parked a block away. My father's badge rested on my lap, faint sunlight glinting off the nick where the bullet had grazed it. The same men who once saluted him now walked in and out of that building laughing, carrying boxes of evidence they'd probably tampered with. I watched them one by one, studying faces, remembering the smirks from the funeral. Inside that department stood every false friend my father had trusted. One of them held the trigger that ended him. When the clock hit 9, a familiar truck pulled up. Preston Lane, the same deputy whose file my father left behind. I remembered his face from childhood birthdays and fishing trips. He used to call me Soldier Boy before I even wore a uniform. Now he stepped out of that truck with arrogance carved into his walk, shaking hands with the new chief like he'd earned the right. That handshake stayed in my head. It didn't look professional, it looked rehearsed. I waited until shift changed before slipping around the back. Years in the field taught me how to move unseen, how to blend into a place that didn't want you there. The back entry light flickered just enough to cover my reflection on the metal door as I picked the lock. Inside, the air smelled of sweat and toner. Empty corridors stretched ahead, littered with case files and coffee stains. My father's old office door was locked too, tempered glass sprayed with industrial cleaner to erase his name tag. But the cleaner missed one thing, the faint outline of his name etched under the surface. I pushed the door open. Dust swirled like ghosts. His desk was empty except for a single picture frame flipped face down. When I turned it over, there we were, him, Preston, and me standing in uniform, smiles stretched, unaware of what we'd become to each other. The picture cracked when I set it down too hard. Inside the desk drawer, hidden beneath a false panel, I found an ID card that didn't belong to my father. Morgan Hale, Internal Affairs. So, she wasn't just another officer. She'd been investigating from the inside. But according to the system, her employment record ended the day after his death. Everything about her was scrubbed clean. A faint thud echoed down the hallway, pulling me out of thought. I stepped behind the door, slipped the safety off my pistol out of instinct. Footsteps approached, hard leather tapping rhythmically against linoleum. Then I heard a familiar tone, Preston's. Rough, confident, unbothered. Heard someone was messing around in the old man's office again. I held my breath until his voice faded. When I peeked out, he was at the entrance, laughing with another deputy over something on his phone. One flash of the screen caught my eye. An old photo, my father and Morgan together, time-stamped just days before he died. That's when I realized Preston wasn't afraid of what he'd done. He was flaunting it. I slipped out the rear exit before they noticed. Rain hit my face like cold truth. That night, I tracked down a man my father once trusted, Nathaniel Boyd, an ex-judge now living outside town. His name showed up in every one of the files my father stored, always signed off on suspicious searches, always clearing dirty officers. He didn't open the door when I knocked, just spoke through the crack. You shouldn't be here. They still watch me sometimes. The fear in his voice was confirmation enough. I left a card with my number, no words exchanged. Sometimes silence reveals more than questions ever will. On the way back, headlights appeared behind me. 2 cars. They stayed close, too close for coincidence. Every turn I took, they mirrored. My pulse steadied, not from fear, but training. When I cut across a bridge, I turned sharply onto an abandoned service road. The cars slowed down, didn't follow, watching from a distance instead. At home, I sat in the kitchen replaying the events, laying everything out in my head like battlefield positions. Preston leads the dirty circle. Morgan disappeared right after the killing. Nathaniel buried the investigations. And somewhere in this tangle of loyalty and greed sat my father's truth. I couldn't tell if I was unearthing justice or rewriting his death sentence all over again. 3 days later, a letter arrived. No return address, just my name written in block letters. Inside, a single photograph. My father lying across his kitchen floor, time-stamped minutes before the supposed shootout. That meant someone had been inside his home before it happened, someone close. On the back was a message. He trusted all the wrong brothers. I sat motionless. My father's words echoed again. Don't fight them with bullets. Fight them with truth. But truth doesn't come free. It costs you everyone who ever smiled in your direction. That night, I went to the only graveyard in town. The rain had stopped, but thunder still rolled far off like artillery. His grave was fresh, the dirt still loose, the name still shining on the stone, Sheriff Colin Ward. I placed the photo near his headstone and whispered, "You said don't fight them with bullets, but you never said I had to fight alone." When I turned to leave, a black SUV parked at the edge of the cemetery. The headlights stayed on me as I walked toward the exit. Then the window rolled down just enough for me to hear a woman's voice I hadn't expected to ever hear again. Morgan. She didn't smile. Her eyes told a story her lips didn't. Fear, guilt, something in between. "They know you're getting close," she said quietly. "And if you don't stop, they'll make you your father's sequel." I stared at her, half rain, half disbelief, while she handed me a folded document. "Read this when you're alone," she said, then drove off without another word. Inside the folded page was a list. Department names, badge numbers, deposit accounts, and one line drawn under all of it in red ink. Operation Silver Creek, confidential. And beneath it, a single name stood out among the others. Preston Lane, task lead. The world didn't tilt, it narrowed. Every sound around me shrank to one pulse inside my chest. The truth wasn't beneath the surface anymore. It was right there, staring me in the face. That night, I packed my service pistol, the badge, my father's files, and the list Morgan risked her life to give. Whatever Silver Creek was, it meant something worth killing for. And if I had to walk through every shadow my father tried to expose, I'd do it not for revenge, but for peace. Because sometimes, silence isn't loyalty, it's guilt. And in this town, guilt wears a badge. The storm finally broke that morning, leaving the streets washed clean, like the town wanted to pretend nothing rotten hid beneath it. The quiet was unnatural, too neat, too staged. I hadn't slept since Morgan's warning, her voice still pressing in the back of my mind. By noon, A mail truck stopped near the edge of my driveway. The driver didn't look at me, didn't wave. He just dropped a thick envelope into the box and drove off faster than he should have. No return address. No postmark. I took it inside, dropped it on the kitchen table. My gut twisted. Army years teach a man how to sense danger long before it shows its face. The edge of the envelope was torn, like someone had opened it once and sealed it again. I slit it open with my knife. Inside were 6 glossy photographs. The first was my father, sitting in a diner booth I didn't recognize. Across from him, Preston Lane and 2 officers I'd never seen. The second photo showed the same group outside the sheriff's office, arguing. The third, my father alone by his patrol car, hands raised. The fourth photo stopped me cold. 3 deputies. Muzzle flash. My father falling. Written on the back of that one sentence. He was warned. So are you. My stomach knotted, not from fear, but rage. Whoever sent it wanted to rattle me. They wanted me to stop looking. But it only sharpened my focus. That evening, I drove out to the diner pictured in the photos. It was 30 minutes outside town, half burned from a kitchen accident 2 years back. What remained was a hollow shell of blackened beams and glass shards. Inside the wreck, I found spray-painted words on one wall. Silver Creek never dies. The same phrase written across the list Morgan gave me. My flashlight flickered across something beneath the floorboards, an old evidence box burned at the corners. It was marked SC-47. Inside were empty shell casings and a rusted badge tag belonging to a deputy named Blake Carter. The department listed him dead for years. So why was his badge in a box under a crime scene? I packed the tag into my pocket. Someone tried to bury every thread my father tugged on, but the dirt was never deep enough. As I stepped outside, a noise snapped from behind the diner, boots crushing gravel. My instincts kicked. I dropped low behind a half-collapsed counter. A car engine purred. Headlights cut through the darkness. Then, bullets shattered the windows. Glass exploded, pieces raining across the floor. I crawled out from the side, pulled my weapon, fired a warning shot toward the car's tires, but the shooter didn't slow. The car sped off, taillights disappearing into the curve of the road. The message was clear: stop digging or join your father. By morning, I met Morgan again. This time, at a park near the outskirts, where children once played before fear replaced community. She looked worse, like the weight of staying alive was heavier than guilt itself. She didn't waste time. They know I gave you the list, she said softly. Preston's cleaning house. Anyone tied to Colin Ward is on the ledger. Silver Creek, I said. What is it? Her eyes darted across the empty park. An off-the-books sting your father started years ago. He was building proof that a network of officers, mostly deputies and transport cops, were running weapons through confiscated shipments. Preston was supposed to help him shut it down. Instead, he took it over. My father tried to fix the system and drowned in it. Morgan handed me a small flash drive wrapped in tape. That's all I could save before they purged the servers. Leave town, Commander. These people don't arrest, they erase. I looked at her hands, trembling so slightly she didn't notice. If you're scared, go underground. She shook her head. There's nowhere left safe to hide from them. Before I could stop her, she left. No words, no explanation, just the sound of footsteps fading into distance. That night, inside my father's old study, I plugged the flash drive into his rusted laptop. The screen blinked to life, ghostly blue. Dozens of file fragments appeared, audio logs, reports, bank records. The most recent entry was from 2 days before his death. His voice again, tired but steady. Preston's growing bold. They've turned incoming evidence vans into smuggling routes. If I can't submit the proof myself, I'll bury it where only blood can uncover it. The call logs following the file showed 3 attempts to dial the same number, Preston Lane, right before the recorded time of his death. I sat in the dark, lit only by the laptop glow, piecing everything into one timeline. My father exposed an internal smuggling ring. Preston hijacked it and silenced him. Morgan uncovered the cover-up, tried to help, and now every name tied to either was disappearing. Lightning cracked outside, rumbling low and close. When I looked back to the window, a pair of headlights glared through the curtains. The outline of a car parked just beyond the fence. I shut the laptop, grabbed my weapon, cut the power to the house. Footsteps sounded outside. 2 pairs, slow, deliberate. Boots again. I moved down the hallway silently, years of training taking over. The front door rattled once, twice. Then quiet. Seconds later, glass shattered. A bullet split the picture on the wall, my father smiling, the frame bursting apart. I aimed low, fired back once, disabling the porch light and buying myself a second of anonymity. When I peeked outside, the intruders were gone. Just burned tire marks on the dirt road. They weren't trying to kill me yet. They wanted fear to soften me first. But that was their first mistake. They thought I was my father's son in grief. They forgot I was a soldier still breathing restraint, and restraint can be deadlier than rage. I turned the badge in my hand again and whispered to the silence, "You took his life. Now I'll take your secrets." That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the window, listening to the wind move through the empty street. Every shadow a lesson. Every flicker of light a reminder that survival was now a skill I'd have to relearn. Somewhere out there, Preston thought the truth died with my father. But truth doesn't die. It waits for the right hands to lift it again. The rain returned by dawn, light at first, then pouring like it wanted to erase the last 24 hours. I hadn't left the house. The shattered picture frame still lay across the floor, my father's frozen smile sliced by the bullet that missed me. The air smelled like gunpowder and rainwater, and something heavier, something that used to be safety. I replayed his old recording again, the words dissolving into static halfway through. Beneath the hiss, faint voices overlapped, a woman and a man arguing. When the noise cleared for just a second, a name broke through. Morgan. She'd said she couldn't help anymore. She'd walked away. But my father's files proved she'd been deep inside Silver Creek long before any warning ever reached me. And if her voice was on that recording, it meant she wasn't just an informant. She'd been part of it once. By noon, I traced one of the account numbers from the flash drive to a shell company in her name. A company shut down after my father's death. Maybe fear forced her out. Maybe guilt. Either way, she owed me truth. I left the house the way I'd leave a base. Careful, silent, expecting fire from every direction. Her address sat across the river, a weather-torn trailer parked behind an abandoned feed store. 2 cars sat out front, both with plates belonging to other counties. I parked downwind and approached through the tall grass. The front door stood half open. Inside smelled like metal and antiseptic. The only sound was a small generator humming, feeding power to a single lamp on the table. Morgan sat there, wrapped in a blanket, a cut above her eyebrow stitched by shaky hands. The gun beside her was cocked, but pointed at the floor. "I figured you'd find me," she said quietly, eyes fixed on the lamp's glow. "It's what men like you do. You follow orders, even when the body giving them's already in the ground." I didn't answer. Words didn't matter anymore. I needed her to talk before the next bullet found her too. She drew a deep breath. Colin trusted me. Maybe too much. I joined Silver Creek before he did. I thought it was a cleanup operation, taking dirty guns off the street. But it was the opposite. Preston turned it into a mirror trade. She looked at me finally, guilt softening her tone. "When your father started digging, I tried to stall him, hoped he'd back off. But he didn't, and I didn't warn him fast enough." Her hands shook as she reached for something under the table, a small box wrapped in duct tape. Inside lay a worn flash card, dark with soot. "This was his insurance," she said. "He hid it in the file room's vent at the station. I pulled it out the night he was killed. I was there when they cornered him. I heard his voice, and I ran like a coward." The sound of the word coward fell heavy between us. Outside, an engine roared and faded distant, a sound too consistent with surveillance. She noticed it, too. "They've been rotating shifts," she murmured. Preston's not sleeping. He knows you're alive. She handed me the card. There's a list on that drive. Shipments, routes, judges paid to look away. If you leak even a fraction, he's finished. But if you stay, you'll end like your father. I looked at her ruined hands. Knuckles cut, nails black from blood. Why help now? I asked quietly. She stared through the window's gaps, voice thin. Because every night I see him standing there with a badge I don't deserve to wear. Lightning flashed outside, revealing movement by the parked cars, two silhouettes in raincoats shifting closer. Morgan's breath stilled. They found us, she whispered. I pulled her toward the rear door as the first shot cracked the front window. Shards exploded across the table, slicing through the air. She stumbled, but followed as we ducked behind the shed. Tires screeched. Doors slammed. We crawled along the drainage ditch until the trees swallowed the property. The smell of oil and mud blurred everything but instinct. Behind us, her trailer lit orange. The second explosion swallowed the sound of sirens. We didn't stop until the road disappeared under fog. She leaned against a trunk, coughing hard. It's done, she said. They won't think either of us walked out. She pressed the car key into my palm. There's a cabin north side, off Route 9. Inside's a backup of the same files. You'll need it when you decide how loud justice should sound. Rain mixed with the smoke settling around her, her voice barely above a whisper. Don't come back here. I drove all night. The distance between us shrinking and stretching with every memory she stitched into confession. By dawn, the road opened into the trees she described. The cabin sat crooked on the ridge, birds already circling the ruined roof. The lock broke easily. Inside smelled of damp paper and gun oil. I set the small drive she gave me beside the old one, plugged both into the laptop. Lines of data scrolled, financial ledgers, recordings, names, transactions. Near the bottom, a final file marked Ward_Bridge opened on its own. My father again. Tired. Angry. Alive just hours before death. If someone finds this, it means Morgan told the truth. But it also means Preston made me choose, the badge or the bloodline. I chose wrong for too long. Tell my boy, honor isn't what saves a man. Truth does. The recording ended there, half cut by static. For the first time since his death, I felt more clarity than pain. The proof was right here, but the truth wasn't enough anymore. Those still pulling strings had to face daylight. Outside, the rain eased into mist. I stepped onto the porch, the forest so still it felt like it was listening. Somewhere miles south, Morgan's trailer was nothing but smoke and silence. She carried her secrets into the fire, but she left me everything I needed. The next move wouldn't be in hiding. It would be inside the very system they built to protect themselves. Silver Creek wasn't just a secret. It was a weapon, and now it was mine to turn. The cabin walls still smelled of smoke by the time dawn bled into the trees. I hadn't slept. Every file from both drives spread across the table like maps of a forgotten battlefield. Names, dates, account transfers linking cops, businessmen, a retired judge, even a congressman. It wasn't a handful of crooked officers anymore. It was an industry. I printed out 2 pages, folded them into my pocket. The rest I burned in the fireplace, because in this game the less they can chase, the longer you breathe. When the fire ate the last of the paperwork, I drove south toward the city. Getting proof wasn't enough this time. I needed a chain reaction. The kind of exposure that didn't arrest people, it dismantled them. Highway miles blurred into gray motion. My father's voice stayed steady in my head. Fight them with truth. At noon, I reached the outskirts, an industrial district where old factories stood like rusted witnesses. Preston owned a warehouse here through one of his shell companies. The sign outside read, West Transit Logistics. But inside those walls, money turned into weapons and men like my father became obstacles. I parked 2 blocks down, slipped through a drainage path, and climbed a side ladder toward a cracked window. My reflection stared back, older than it looked days ago. Through the glass, I saw Preston talking with two men in suits over crates marked evidence disposal. Rangers used to call that kind of posture the calm before wrong. One of the men held a tablet displaying my father's signature on a seized weapons manifest, dated a week after his death. They'd forged every record to rewrite history. I recorded everything with my phone camera, keeping my breathing steady. Then one of the men turned toward me, young, alert, cleaner shoes than he should have worn in a warehouse. His eyes landed on the faint shadow of my movement. I stepped back, pressed flat to the wall as the light swept across the window. A voice shouted orders. Boots clattered on concrete. No hesitation this time. They knew someone was here. I jumped from the second floor, landed hard behind a stack of barrels, and sprinted toward the rear exit. The first shot cracked the metal beam above my shoulder. I hit the door running. The alley opened into blinding light, rain-slicked streets shining like mirrors. I threw myself behind a dumpster, caught my breath, then disappeared into traffic before they could corner me. That night, I hid at a motel near the river. The television flickered between static and local news. Nothing about Silver Creek. Nothing about the explosion at Morgan's trailer either. It was as if the town had collectively decided not to remember. I connected my laptop to the motel Wi-Fi, uploaded the footage. The transfer bar crawled slow, like fear wearing a progress bar. Once finished, I encrypted it onto a hidden drive and sent an anonymous copy to a contact my father once trusted, a journalist named Fiona Marks. If anyone could make truth louder than gunfire, it was her. After sending it, I cleaned the gun, checked every window, then finally sat on the bed. The mattress sank lower on one side, and the mold on the ceiling traced patterns like battle plans. Sleep came late and restless. At one point, I heard footsteps outside, the slow, methodical kind. By reflex, I rolled off the bed, gun drawn. A shadow moved past the curtain. Then nothing. Just the low hum of traffic. Dawn came again, colorless and dull. I left the motel before checkout, taking only what fit into a single bag. The world shrinks fast when you're hunted. Midday, Fiona called from a disposable number. "You weren't joking," she said. "These files, they implicate half the department. And not just them. There are bank transfers to a judge named Boyd, maybe the same one your father prosecuted last year. Nathaniel Boyd, the retired judge who wouldn't open his door." My pulse tightened. "He's still covering them," I said. "He signs off every search warrant they need to bury cases." "I'll dig into his background," Fiona replied. "But whatever you're doing, be careful. Someone's intercepting communications. When I opened your files, a second IP pinged from your county. They're watching both of us." The line went silent for a moment. Then she whispered, "Finish what your father started. But don't die for it." The call ended. She was brave, or doomed, depending on which news cycle would hit first. By evening, I headed toward Boyd's town. His house sat behind wrought iron gates, surrounded by oak trees heavy with leaves. I parked 2 blocks away and approached on foot, the way soldiers approach silence. Slow, equal breaths, no wasted motion. Through a window, I saw him sitting under a lamp, papers spread before him, glass of bourbon untouched. His shoulders slumped like guilt bent them. I could almost hear the kind of breathing a man does when his conscience finally wakes. A movement behind me broke the trance, a shape in the dark, reflection of steel. I turned just as a gloved hand struck the back of my neck. Pain flashed white. I hit the ground, rolled, swung low, connected with the attacker's knee. He fell sideways, mask shifting. I saw enough of his face in the moonlight to recognize it. One of Preston's men. The same silhouette from the diner ambush photos. He reached for the gun again. I grabbed his wrist, twisted until bones cracked, then pinned him to the ground. "Why Boyd?" I hissed. But his eyes said everything I needed to know. Fear, loyalty, finality. Instead of answering, he bit down hard on something between his teeth. His body jolted once and stilled. Cyanide. The network protected itself, even in death. I dragged his body into the trees, covered it with leaves, and left before Boyd ever looked up from his papers. Hours later, I returned to the motel, changed cars, and scrubbed every trace that tied me there. My reflection in the mirror looked like a ghost wearing fatigue. The more truth I carried, the less of me remained. Silver Creek wasn't just a code name. It was a living organism feeding on greed. I had names now: Preston, Boyd, half the command chain. I could end it all, but I needed one more piece, solid proof linking them to the first murder. That proof still waited somewhere inside those station walls, the same place where my father's plaque once hung. It was time to walk back into the lion's den. The drive back into town felt like entering enemy territory. Every mile closer pressed heavier on the chest, every radio static carrying a whisper of danger waiting on the other end. The same sign that once welcomed visitors, Pine Ridge, serving with honor since 1942, now looked more like a threat. I parked 2 blocks behind the sheriff's station. From there, the whole building glowed pale under street lamps, familiar yet foreign, as if justice itself had been drained from its walls. The voices inside weren't brothers in uniform anymore. They were a swarm protecting Rot. The last time I'd stood here, my father was still alive. He'd walked out that front door, badge pinned straight, thinking his honesty made him untouchable. Now, 19 years of my discipline felt useless against what I had to face. I entered through the rear maintenance door just before dawn, blending through shift change. The uniform hanging on the back shelf didn't fit perfectly, but it passed a glance. I pulled the hat low, kept the shield facing forward, walked like I belonged. The hallways buzzed with idle talk, laughter sharp, mean, unnatural. Preston's office light burned upstairs, glimmering against glass. Through the narrow slit of the blinds, I saw him leaning over his desk, speaking with another officer. He looked different under fluorescent light, smoother, wealthier. A predator learning to smile better. I slipped into the archives room on the lower floor, where old evidence logs gathered dust. The surveillance hard drive I needed should have been labeled Station Perimeter 11/04, the night my father died. But where the file box should have been, there was only space. Someone had already taken it. A note pinned to the inside wall read, "You can stop pretending you're alone." The sound of boots echoed behind me, steady, exact. I turned slowly. Preston stood there, hands folded, smile crawling like rust. "You really thought we wouldn't see it coming, Commander?" He stepped closer, the smell of gun oil and arrogance thick in the air. "That footage you took in the warehouse, you sent it somewhere, didn't you?" I kept my stare fixed. "You mean the footage where you lied on record about my father?" A flicker crossed his face, a crack no man could hide. He looked to his left, then whistled. 2 deputies entered, rifles slung. "Take his phone, his gun, everything," Preston said. "We'll handle this quietly." They moved in too close. Years of training uncoiled. I ducked, twisted one arm, threw the first into the shelf. The second swung wild. I blocked, countered, caught his jaw clean. The impact threw both men into the stacked crates. Preston stumbled backward as I aimed his fallen deputy's rifle at him. "You pull that trigger, every badge in the state will wear your face on a kill order," he said, voice low but shaking. 85 officers just swore revenge at roll call this morning. You really want that smoke? The number echoed in my head. 85 cops swore revenge. He wasn't bluffing. The system had already turned into an attack dog, and I was the intruder. I lowered the rifle inches from his chest. "They already killed the wrong man once. Tell them they can try again." Before he answered, I slammed the butt of the gun into the light switch. Darkness filled the room. I moved fast, out the back hallway, through the emergency door, down into open rain. Bullets followed, sparking off the concrete behind me. By the time I reached my car, the radio in the town square already blared an alert. "Attention, former Army Commander Victor Ward, armed fugitive, suspected in assault and theft within the department. Dangerous. Approach with caution." My father's name in reverse, Ward. They twisted everything, even the bloodline. I drove north through back roads, headlights off, rain slicing through the windshield like gunfire. My thoughts tangled. Morgan's warning, Boyd's cowardice, Preston's smirk. Then Fiona's voice from earlier returned like a ghost. Don't die for it. But the truth never survives without sacrifice. Somewhere between the hills, I pulled into an abandoned fuel stop. In the rear trunk, I kept a military-grade radio I'd salvaged years back. Tuning through static, I caught the police scanner's coded chatter. Units 42 through 88. Permission to execute warrant if contact occurs. 85 cops, all sworn to bring one man down. They'd framed me faster than evidence could breathe. By dawn, I reached the woods outside town. Mud swallowed my boots as I climbed an old service path, one my father and I used to hike when I was a boy. Back then, every path led home. Tonight, it led nowhere. The small cabin at the ridge gave some cover. Inside, I laid out the remaining files, marked every confirmed officer from Silver Creek. The list had grown longer. Men who never needed money, men who just liked power. I turned on the small radio Fiona had given me. Her voice crackled through faintly on a hidden frequency. Video's out. It's trending everywhere. Half the comments don't believe it. Half demand blood. Preston's spinning it, calling you a traitor. But you hit a nerve. For a moment, the tired fog in my head lifted. Maybe my father's voice was right. Maybe truth could still cut through the noise of corruption. Before I could answer, the sound of engines rumbled from below. Headlights speared through the darkness, rows of them. Trucks, dozens. They'd found me. The radios from their vehicles echoed across the trees. Coded signals, tactical formations. They weren't there to arrest. They were there to erase. I doused the lamp, grabbed my rifle, pressed my back against the wall. Flashlights flashed through the trees, voices spreading in command bursts. Rain poured harder. Boots and thunder competed for sound. A loudspeaker crackled. Victor Ward, surrender now. This is your last chance. I almost laughed. Same line they used on my father before killing him. They surrounded the cabin, 85 against 1. But this wasn't a standoff. It was an echo of everything Silver Creek built. Fear, silence, power. I breathed once, slow and even, heart steady in the dark. I'm not running anymore. I whispered to no one. You wanted a target. Here I am. Outside, the woods blazed white as the first flashbangs ripped through the tree-line. And then, war began again. This time not for territory, but for truth. The explosion ripped through the trees before the flash even reached the cabin. The structure folded like paper, flames climbing fast, turning the rain into steam. I hit the dirt hard, the force throwing me halfway down the ridge. My ears rang, the air thick with smoke and dust. Through the blur, flashlight beams cut the dark. The woods crawled with movement, men shouting, radios barking codes. I couldn't see faces, just the cold rhythm of boots advancing. I crawled toward the hollow logs near the creek, the same place my father once used to hunt years ago. The habit saved me now, instinct first, fear later. When the second blast hit, chunks of flaming debris scattered, brightening the forest into brief daylight. Gunfire followed, short bursts, organized, corners closing in. I moved between tree shadows, fired twice to cover a shift, and kept low. Every shot aimed at silence, not death. They wanted me gone. I wanted truth breathing long enough to matter. Smoke rolled thicker. I could taste ash and metal. Through the haze, I caught a figure moving differently from the rest, slower, limping. When the flashes lit again, I saw her face. Morgan. She stumbled out from the glow, bleeding through her sleeve. Thought you were dead, I muttered, pulling her behind a fallen log. They hit the cabin before I got close, she whispered. I tried to warn. Another shot split the sentence. We crawled deeper into the ravine, water rushing around our boots. The noise of tactics above masked our movement. Morgan's breathing came rough, half-choked, the wound worse than she admitted. I tore the sleeve, wrapped it tight with my scarf. They won't stop, she said miserably. Preston sent every unit after the video leaked. They think you killed 2 deputies in the station. Let them think, I said. Lies only live if truth keeps quiet. She forced a faint smile. Still sound like him. Somewhere uphill, voices shouted coordinates. Search teams tightening formation. I checked the magazine, counted what little was left. There's an old training facility 2 miles west, I said. My father used to run drills there. If we can reach it, maybe we can die slower, she asked through the pain. Maybe get signal. Maybe send everything before they jam it again. She nodded weakly. Then go. I can still walk. We moved through mud and brush for an hour. Rain relentless, moon hidden. By the time the ground leveled, the outline of concrete buildings rose from the fog. Cracked walls, rusted gates. The old training compound. Inside, remnants of gunfire marks traced years of history. I found the power room, flicked a switch that sparked but held. Dim emergency lights blinked alive, washing the space orange. Morgan collapsed against a wall, pale. You ever wonder why your father kept fighting? She murmured. I loaded the files onto an old field laptop. Because the badge was supposed to mean something. She pressed her palm to the wound, blood slipping through her fingers. Sometimes symbols kill faster than bullets. On screen, the data streamed wide. Video files, names, evidence pressed and buried for years. My father's voice echoed one last time in the final folder, a calm, worn tone. You either serve truth, or you serve the men hiding from it. Outside, engines roared closer again. The facility erupted in headlights as trucks blocked both gates. Floodlights turned the fog to white fire. Loudspeakers barked orders. This time, it wasn't a negotiation. Commands were clean, surgical. Fire on sight. Eliminate targets. I disconnected the laptop, hid the memory drive inside my jacket. Morgan tried to rise, but faltered halfway. Go, she rasped. They need what's on that drive more than they need me. But I shook my head. No one dies cleaning up their mess alone. Bullets tore through the windows, sparks raining in streaks. We ducked behind a steel divider. The blast shook the floor. Fire crept from the hall where a gas line snapped. Smell of smoke and paint mixed thick. I grabbed Morgan by the arm, dragged her toward the back exit. Each step screamed time running out. Flames climbed the walls, swallowing ceiling tiles. When we burst through the rear door, the night was alive again with light and chaos. Half the forest burned red. The other half shivered under rain. 2 squad cars flanked the hill road ahead. Officers ready, rifles lifted. I fired once high, glass shattering above their heads. Confusion bought seconds. Seconds opened distance. We dove into the ditch, rolled under the barrier fence. Behind us, the entire building cracked open in one thunderous roar. Fireball lifted high, coloring the clouds blood orange. Heat licked the grass, ash falling like snow. We lay there breathing hard, faces muddy, rain sizzling against what was left of that facility. Morgan turned her head toward me, voice faint, nearly gone. That was his place, wasn't it? I nodded. It was where he taught truth still had a home. She closed her eyes, whisper almost too soft to catch. Guess it burned with him. I stared at the flames climbing the ridge and said nothing. But deep down, I knew she was wrong. The truth didn't burn, it spread. By sunrise, what was left of the facility smoldered black, smoke reaching miles into the sky. The town would wake to headlines about another fugitive explosion. But somewhere out there, Fiona still had the files. The story would break wider once she connected the dots. Morgan slept shallow on the passenger seat as I drove through back roads toward the highway. Her pulse weak but steady. The drive clutched inside my jacket burned against the skin like a promise. Behind us, the forest hissed with rain and smoke. 85 cops might have sworn revenge that night, but only the truth would survive to tell them what their revenge had truly cost. And dawn, for the first time in days, didn't look like surrender. It looked like proof that someone was still left to finish what my father began. We crossed the county line just before noon, rain tapering into mist. The air smelled of burned pine, wet road, and something sour, survival. Morgan slept against the window, color drained from her face, her uniform soaked in dried blood and smoke. I drove without destination, just far enough that police radios blurred into static. As the highway turned toward the hills, I thought of the one man still breathing who could validate everything. The retired judge, Nathaniel Boyd. The same man who once signed every search warrant Silver Creek used to disguise its smuggling runs. He'd hidden behind his robe long enough. It was time he saw the ghosts his signature created. We reached his estate by dusk, stone walls, heavy gates, no guards in sight. The place looked abandoned, yet lights flickered inside like a man too scared to sleep. Morgan stayed in the car. She was strong, but the wound had turned her skin faint. "You get what you came for," she whispered. "If he won't confess, make him afraid enough to wish he did." I took her hand briefly, then stepped into the dark. The front door was partly open. Inside, dust floated in long vertical lines through lamplight. Old law books lined every shelf. A faded portrait of Boyd in his prime hung crooked over the fireplace. He was already sitting at the table, suit wrinkled, tie loosened, eyes fixed on a glass of bourbon that hadn't been touched in hours. "I knew you'd come," he said flatly. "You still have a choice," I told him. "Speak the truth, clear your name, and end it before Preston uses you for another cover-up." He laughed, a sound so thin it almost broke. "Truth doesn't end anything. It only changes the kind of lies men need to survive." I pulled out my father's old recorder, set it on the table. "Then let's change the lies." He stared at it for a long second, then started talking. Every word came measured, resigned. "Colin warned me," he said quietly. "He found the shipments, guns, narcotics, money transfers hidden in asset seizures. I believed him at first, but when Preston came with his friends from higher offices, they showed me figures, donations, power. They said justice was a negotiation." He looked at the bourbon glass. "I signed those warrants. Every one. And when Colin threatened to go public, I was told he'd lose everything. They didn't tell me they'd kill him." "Who gave the order?" Boyd's jaw tightened. "Preston carried it out, but the one funding the operation was from inside the Justice Department. The man your father once testified for. A name that can't fall without taking half the state with it." I leaned forward. "Say it." He hesitated, then forced it out. "Victor Haynes, regional director. The same man pinned medals to my uniform years ago. A man I'd once saluted." The room fell silent. Just rain, low thunder, and the hum of Boyd's guilt vibrating through the space. "I kept the documents," he confessed. "Copies of everything Preston sent. It's all in a safe downstairs, behind the wall vent." I followed him down to the basement. The air there was cold, damp, smelling of rust and mold. Boyd's hands trembled as he turned the lock and opened the safe. Inside were dozens of files, sealed drives, photos, transaction lists. The missing pieces of every unanswered why. As I packed the evidence into my bag, he stayed by the door, eyes glassy. "You'll make me pay for this," he said softly. "But I already have. I wake up every night hearing your father's voice." "No," I said. "You hear your own." When I climbed back toward the main room, lightning flashed through the window, showing movement outside. Headlights slipped behind the trees. Preston never came himself. He sent hunters. "Stay inside," I told Boyd. "You're safer confessing than hiding." But Boyd shook his head. "There's no safety left." He walked to the desk, pulled a gun from the drawer, and turned toward me with a strange calm. "Make sure the world sees this before they erase you too." Before I could speak, the shot split the room. The glass shattered behind him as he fell forward, the recorder still running. Upstairs, more engines stopped beyond the gate. I grabbed the evidence, ran through the back door into open rain. The pavement flashed under muzzle fire as deputies shouted orders. I darted between the hedges, vaulted the fence, and disappeared into the woods. Behind me, the house blazed orange, fuel and flame turning confession into ash. Another truth burned, but not before the recorder captured it. Boyd's words lived now on that tape. The who, the why, the rot underneath the badge. I ran until the lights faded. When I reached the car, Morgan looked up weakly, questions written in her eyes. I just said one word. Got it. She leaned back, relief and sorrow tangled. Then it's time. Time for what? For the world to know what justice actually costs. I started the engine, water streaming over the windshield, Boyd's blood still ringing in my ears. Tomorrow, I'd send everything to Fiona. Then I'd face whatever came next, truth exposed or body buried. The night after Boyd's death felt endless. Lightning flashed every few seconds, washing Morgan's bloody bandage in ghost light. I kept driving through the storm, every mile heavier than the last. The files from Boyd's safe sat in a sealed duffel on the back seat. Inside that bag lived everything. The beginning, the betrayal, the proof. When dawn finally cracked over the hills, I dialed Fiona from a borrowed phone. My voice came rough. It's time. She was already awake. Tell me you have it. I've got everything, I said. Signatures, wire transfers, off-book payments from Victor Haynes, and Preston's direct orders. The judge killed himself an hour after confessing. A long silence followed. Then Fiona said softly, "Send it all. I'll risk it." I used the burner's hotspot, breaking the upload into smaller encrypted packets. Each file pulsed toward her newsroom server, slow but steady. Truth didn't need hurry, it just needed endurance. By sunrise, the storm cleared. Morgan slept leaning against the window, weak but still breathing. I stepped out onto the roadside dirt, looked up at a sky finally clear after days of rain. For the first time, the air didn't taste of grief, it tasted of resolve. By afternoon, the first leak hit public networks. Fiona posted snippets of Preston's recorded meetings, patterns of accounts, voice samples. Within an hour, social feeds filled with clips of my father calling out Silver Creek years earlier. Headlines buzzed. The war inside law enforcement. And then, Army commander's father exposed corruption, killed by deputies. By evening, my phone lines were melting. Reporters, old allies, strangers. It felt like the world suddenly remembered how to look. But public outrage wasn't truth's victory. It was only noise until justice followed. At sunset, I parked on a ridge overlooking the town. The smoke from Boyd's burned house still hung low in the valley. Every radio channel screamed contradictions. Some called me a hero. Others called me a murderer. Morgan stirred, whispering, "Did it work?" "The world's watching now," I said. She managed a faint smile. "Then he won." But before the warmth of her words could settle, blue and red lights flowered in the distance. Convoys, dozens of them, threading through the dark. Preston's counterstrike. The scanner on the passenger seat buzzed chaotic. Units converge at perimeter sector 8, suspect armed, accompanied by fugitive officer Morgan Hale. Lethal force authorized. Lethal force, I repeated quietly. They weren't coming for arrest. They were coming for erasure again. I turned the ignition. We split. They'll track movement easier if we stay together. Morgan's eyes widened. "No. I finished this with you." "You already did," I said. "You gave me the evidence. I need you alive to testify, not to die proving loyalty." Before she could protest, I pressed her hand once and stepped out into the wind. "There's an old tunnel under the ridge," I said. "Go. Follow it south. Wait until dawn. You'll know when to come out." Her eyes stayed on mine for 1 second longer. Then she nodded, climbed out the opposite side, and vanished into the trees. I walked toward the clearing, hands steady, pulse measured. The approaching headlights painted the fog in streaks of red and blue. When they surrounded me, Preston led the pack. Face hard, voice calm but distant. "Turn yourself in, Victor. This all ends tonight." I met his stare. "You said that about my father once." His smile flickered. "He was good. Too good for this world. So you gave him an exit plan?" He sighed. "You sent your files to the media, didn't you? They won't survive 24 hours. We still own every judge in this county. That evidence dies when I say it does." "But you don't own time," I said. And you're already out of it. Sirens wailed behind the convoy, a second wave rolling in. This time it wasn't just local police. Marked on the sides of the vehicles were 3 letters that changed everything. FBI. Preston's composure cracked. Who? You think I'd only share this with the press? I said. Every copy went to federal servers before I got here. Half the world's awake now. The look in his eyes turned from rage to survival. He turned to run, but steel clashed through tires as agents stormed the hillside. Orders rang out, clean and clinical. Preston's men dropped weapons one by one. The rain started again, not violent, just enough to make the scene shimmer like redemption. An agent cuffed Preston, reading his rights. The sound was almost poetic. I stood still through it all, water soaking through my clothes, the weight of 19 years pressing light for once. Preston turned his head as they pushed him toward the car. You think this changes anything? He spat. They'll bury you with him in memory. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Some battles, and not with victory shots, but with silence. Hours later, the FBI camp buzzed with movement. Agents collected files, downloaded copies of Boyd's drive, documented weapons caches buried across multiple counties. My statement ran long into the morning. Morgan was safe. They'd found her by the tunnel, unconscious but alive. Fiona's news feed pinged constantly, confirming public exposure had doubled protests outside state offices. An older agent approached while I sat wrapped in a thermal blanket. You've done enough, he said. Go home. I looked toward the horizon, smoke still hanging faint from burning debris. Home burned a long time ago, I replied. He nodded softly and walked away. As the sunrise drew clear, I took my father's badge from my pocket. The metal was scorched, edges warped from the night he died. I wiped the soot, held it against the light. For the first time, it gleamed, clean, unburied. Fiona sent one final message, breaking everywhere. Truth's out. I closed my eyes. Maybe my father was right. Maybe bullets never win battles built on lies. Truth had to walk through fire before anyone believed it. But in the end, it still walked. The town looked different under daylight. Peaceful. Too peaceful. You'd never guess 48 hours ago it had been swallowed by chaos. Its police force splintered in half, truth leaking faster than lies could patch themselves. Preston was in custody now, locked away somewhere federal hands could reach, but corruption doesn't crash overnight. It mutates. I stayed low in a motel near the southern border, halfway between exile and victory. The walls smelled of bleach and cigarette smoke, the kind of place that keeps secrets for a small fee. Morgan rested in the next room, her shoulders stitched and stable. Sleep hadn't found me in days. By afternoon, Fiona called again. Her voice trembled between excitement and dread. The footage is in every major outlet now. Public hearings start in 48 hours. But something's off. One of the agents leaked that someone inside the bureau's feeding information to Preston's people. He's not done yet. My stomach tightened. He's in custody. How's he still pulling strings? There's rumor of a second file, hidden server backups, proof of who funded him in the Justice Department. If those vanish, the whole case falls apart, and someone high up wants them gone. I hung up, closed my eyes, letting the hum of the cheap air conditioner fail to steady me. In war, an enemy's surrender doesn't mean his power dies. It just changes address. That night, I traced back every doubt until one name surfaced again and again, Director Victor Haynes. The same man Boyd mentioned before dying. He'd been quiet throughout this chaos, too quiet for someone whose secrets were burning worldwide. If Preston had a final card, Haynes was the dealer. By midnight, I left Morgan sleeping and drove north to the city where Haynes's office stood. Federal grounds. Heavy surveillance. The kind of place begging for ghosts to get caught walking. But I wasn't planning stealth. Time for quiet wars had ended. The receptionist barely glanced up when I entered the marble lobby. Director's not seeing anyone today, she said. I slid an old photo across the counter. My father, the sheriff, shaking hands with a younger Haynes after a raid. Tell him the son of the man he marked for death just arrived. I said. Her eyes widened slightly. 30 seconds later, 2 agents escorted me upstairs. Haynes's office gleamed too clean. No paper out of place, no fatigue in his face. He smiled like a man behind glass. Commander Ward, I wondered when the storm would crawl to my door. You funded Silver Creek, I said. Boyd confessed before dying. Preston followed orders from you. You made my father a target. He chuckled under his breath. Your father was naive. He thought ideals could feed a department drowning in budget cuts. He wanted purity in a world running on dirt. So yes, I redirected funds, shifted evidence, but only because someone has to decide which battles matter. You soldiers understand that, don't you? I understand orders, I said. Not betrayal. You've already won your parade, he said dismissively. Headlines love you, the mighty sons seeking justice. But heroes fade. This country likes tidy endings. If you walk out that door alive, your truth turns into myth by next week. I've survived longer scandals. His arrogance filled the room like smoke. I reached to the inside pocket and placed the recorder Boyd had used, the same one that captured his confession. When it clicked on, Haynes froze. His own voice echoed from the device. Preston carries it out, but the money runs through the bureau. I gave the order. It wasn't just Boyd who'd confessed. I'd synced every audio transfer. Haynes's files betrayed him the way power always betrays itself. He lunged forward, but the office door opened first. FBI agents flooding in, weapons drawn. Every word we exchanged had streamed live through Fiona's broadcast feed. Truth was walking openly now. Haynes's composure crumbled for the first time. You think exposure saves you, he hissed. Your country needs men like me. No, I said. It needs men like him. I dropped my father's scorched badge on his desk. It hit metal like a gavel. The lead agent read Haynes's rights. His face emptied of everything but disbelief. As they dragged him away, I stood silent, the badge gleaming faintly under fluorescent light. His reflection trapped inside it for a second before disappearing down the hall. Outside, rain returned, a quieter rain, washing glass and concrete alike. The city lights reflected in puddles like fractured memories. I called Morgan. Her voice was weak but alive. It's done, I told her. Then your father can rest, she said softly. Not yet, I said. Not until the badge shines for what it was meant to. She paused, then whispered, maybe now it finally will. I ended the call, stared out at the skyline bleeding gold and storm gray. For so long, my father's death felt like a wound that would never close. But now the ache had changed. It was no longer pain. It was the weight of peace trying to find somewhere to stay. By morning, Preston and Haynes shared the same headline. Federal corruption task ends in arrests. Agents combed through bank vaults, confiscated records, traced a decade of bribes. Boyd's name received an official apology. Fiona's voiceover played across every major outlet. A single family's tragedy exposed a network that lived unchecked for years. Justice, it seems, does arrive. It just takes the stubborn ones to drag it into the light. I turned off the television. Outside my window, dawn broke orange over the city. The storm had finally ended. Still, a quiet truth lingered. Victory never feels pure. Somewhere in the back of every win lives all the things you lost to get there. And yet, as I held my father's badge one last time, the mirror of metal catching daylight, it felt less like closure and more like continuation. The legacy he left wasn't justice. It was endurance. Morning came soft and clean, the first real sunrise in weeks. Not the dull gray kind that hides guilt, but a golden one, like the world was tired of darkness too. I stood at my father's grave, boots buried in wet earth, the wind whispering through pine leaves. His old badge rested on the headstone, polished finally, no blood left to stain it. For the first time, quiet didn't feel heavy, it felt earned. All around, the world had changed. Newspapers shouted names, departments broke apart, and families whose voices had been buried finally spoke. Preston's face glared from every headline. His confession caught forever on record. Haynes, the man who believed power could silence truth, faced charges that reached beyond our borders. Fiona's reports turned into a national storm. But for me, victory wasn't the sound of sirens fading into justice. It was this silence right here, the one my father always wanted. Morgan stood beside me, arm now healed, but voice still fragile. She set a single white rose on the grave. He'd be proud, she said softly. I looked down, half smiling. He'd probably scold me for breaking half the law to prove he was right. She laughed faintly. Maybe, but sometimes breaking the wrong laws fixes the right ones. We stayed there until the wind picked up again, scattering petals across the grass, like the earth finally exhaled. Later, I walked the edge of town where our old house once stood, rebuilt now, walls painted fresh. Kids played in the yard across the street, their laughter blending with distant sirens that weren't warnings anymore. A flyer blew past my feet, Fiona's headline again. Silver Creek, the lie that ended its own silence. I folded it into my jacket pocket and kept walking, because this wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about memory, about making sure no one wore that uniform to hide behind it again. My father used to say, "Justice isn't loud. It whispers in the hearts of those who paid the most to keep it alive." I used to think that sounded poetic. Now I know it was prophecy. That night, before leaving town for good, I sat alone on the old bridge, the same spot he'd loved at sunset. The city lights shimmered over the water, gentle and quiet. I switched on his old recorder, pressed play one last time. His voice came through faint but warm. "If you're hearing this, son, maybe it means you forgave the world before it learned to fix itself." The tape clicked off. I didn't cry. I just sat there in the glow of everything that had finally found peace. And as I stood to leave, one question lingered inside me, the kind that burns quietly long after the credits fade. If truth costs everything, would you still choose it over comfort? Hey everyone. If you felt something through this story, if you stayed till the end, then maybe you felt what my father meant by quiet revenge. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? And what kind of stories hit you the hardest? Betrayal, emotional revenge, family redemption, or something darker? Because I don't just tell these stories for views. I tell them so you feel every beat the way I do when writing them. So, from my heart, thank you for listening till the very last line. If you want more powerful tales of truth, betrayal, and redemption, you know what to do. Hit that like button gently, subscribe so you don't miss the next epic revenge story, and until we meet again in another thriller. Stay safe, stay kind, and remember, sometimes silence is the loudest justice of all.